recording. Okay.
Yeah. Welcome to episode 4 of Source Needed. I'm Liz.
I'm Abby.
And today we're going to be talking about forgery.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much that I want to talk about with forgery, honestly. Like, doing the notes for today, I think that this might be, we might get a second episode out of this at some point.
Yeah. Good, because I feel like, I think there's a lot of angles that we can take, but I'm really curious what what makes you so passionate about this subject.
Yeah.
I think I'm really interested in it from maybe an abstract or historical perspective, and like why forgeries are so contested and why we get so upset about them.
Yeah.
So that's one of the readings that I share today. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's do it.
So the article that I chose for today isn't truly an article, but rather it's the introduction to a book that I have that's all about forgeries. It's called The Art of Forgery. I forget who it's by. I'll put it here. But it's the introduction because I thought it was just like a really good overview of some of the terminology and forgeries through the ages. But the book itself covers different forgery, like famous forgeries, and the reasons why they were, like what they were motivated by.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought we could start with maybe some definitions.
Yeah, I think that was good. I liked that about your article, that it really defined forgery versus fake. Yeah. So let's start.
Yeah, so forgery is the wholesale creation of a fraudulent work. So that's, you make something up completely by an artist who already exists, sort of like what you classically think of a forgery being.
Yeah.
But then fake is a little bit more nuanced. So it's an alteration of or addition to an authentic work of art in order to suggest a different authorship or subject matter that results in greater sale value of the object. Now, to me, that definition sounds like there's a little Venn diagram with conservation.
Ooh.
Which is interesting because later on in this article, they also talk about how in the 20th and 21st centuries, conservation has kind of become part of art forgery in that we know what people are looking for when they're trying to identify if a painting is a forgery.
Interesting.
And so forgers will insert those things into their forgeries as tricks.
That's so cool. I mean, that's so clever and a bit scary.
Yeah. The third category is provenance traps, so confidence tricks in which an altered documented history of an object rather than the object itself results in its greater value. And this is more your area because I feel like that's getting at provenance research.
Yeah, which is very important. And I think a lot of times a certificate of authenticity will include the provenance, and that kind of adds to this whole kind of cultish value of artwork because it's not just about the artwork itself. It's also about where the artwork has been and through what hands it's passed. That's obviously also really important for restitution. It's also important for auction houses, for galleries. You want to have the story of the artwork very clear because that will essentially give it more value and will make its authenticity seem more real. Yeah. There's two ways you can look, I think, if we're looking at forgeries, how you could potentially conclude if it's real or not. You can look at, of course, what you're talking about. So the technical details. The science, which is very, well, I didn't know that there were tricks out there to kind of even, dupe or I guess confuse even the most trained eye. But yeah, there's a technical side, and then there's also the historical side, so the provenance side of, okay, well, where has it been? Do we have it featured in this exhibition catalog? Is it featured in the sales catalog? And that also is something that a connoisseur will do, which is also referenced in the article as well.
Connoisseurship. I like that you said storytelling because what I took away from both of our articles is, and just also stories that I know about forgeries, is that because there's so much unknown mystery about the art world, right? And it's very romanticized, that the way a lot of successful forgeries come to be is because they have a good story.
Yeah.
That people want to believe.
Yeah.
And so it's a confidence scheme, and they buy into the story maybe more so than like the very evident forgery in front of them. Because it's like a chance to discover a new piece of art. And
absolutely.
Don't you want to be part of that?
And because when you look at the market for the old masters, there's such a dwindling supply that any discovery is really just kind of, you know, welcomed. Like, oh my goodness, what do you mean there's a new Leonardo da Vinci painting discovered?
Salvador Mundi, for anyone who's read.
It must be real because, I mean, you know, one person said it was, and then I mean, it's fascinating because that to me is like the pinnacle of, I'm not saying it's a forgery,
but people have said,
people have said. I'm also not going to disclose my opinion on this.
Probably for the best.
No, but it really exemplifies all of this, because the story around it, like when Christie's was putting that to market, they really sold it. It was a whole marketing thing. Like it was this huge news, the rediscovered Da Vinci, and
it sold for like what, $500 million? No, $500 million?
Yeah. Close to. It was $450 million. It's the most expensive piece ever sold.
Yeah. And it might be a fake.
Oh, I mean, the Louvre didn't want to hang it in their exhibition.
So maybe that says something.
But I mean, fascinating too, because there were conservators that worked on that piece.
A lot of people, yeah.
And some of whom did say, like, yeah, this could very well be Da Vinci's work. The problem though as well, and that's something that your article also gets into, is when you're looking at Renaissance art, or even like early Dutch art, or the old masters in general, is that there was this tradition of working in a workshop.
Yeah.
So the artwork would have changed hands anyway, and it was
you might have had your student work, like Leonardo. There was one painting that was referenced in this article was the Mona Lisa. Like there's a version of the Mona Lisa at the Prado in Spain that was probably painted at the same time the Mona Lisa was being painted, maybe by a student in Leonardo's workshop. Maybe he touched it himself a little bit, but it's an attribution issue, which is actually the last category that my article talks about as a type of forgery, which is misattribution of an authentic work, which can be a confidence trick from an expert, but I think it could also be what we're talking about now, which is where, like, it looks like it could be a Leonardo. It's really close. It's definitely from the same time period.
Yeah.
Like the science checks out. We know that it's from then.
Yeah.
You also have this issue of, like, artists would touch up their works. They would come back to it later.
Yeah.
Rembrandt did this often, especially later in life when he was struggling financially. He would take something that was just sort of at the back of the workshop and, you know, change the hat or change the collar so that it looked more contemporary and in fashion with what was currently selling. Is that a fake? Like, how do you define it? Is the question that then has to be answered.
And it's also something that you can see in the contemporary art market as well, where you have people like Jeff Koons, Takashi Murakami, who really work on Damien Hirst, who work on different kind of artwork in such a collaborative way, with
like they have a full workshop that's working on it with them.
Exactly, but that also is required due to the very nature of their work. Because Jeff Koons, I mean, his monumental kind of
big thing,
those balloon sculptures he does of the dogs. I mean, they're so massive. Like, you
need a workshop to do it. You need to hire a team to create it.
So, I mean, yeah, it's a very interesting thing. Although I think we can also kind of take this the other route, which is there are, of course, forgeries done with malintent. And I think, I mean, it's super interesting to kind of trace the history of that as well. So in your article, they also talk about Albrecht Dürer, who is a very famous draftsman, and his prints. Because, I mean, anything that can be reproduced is basically begging to be forged.
Yeah. This article gets into like how a forgery of his prints that was contemporary to like him being alive, his work got copied a lot, was one of the first ever legal cases regarding art and forgery, because there had been previous ones about like documents and money, but art, this also gets back into what we talked about in episode 3 with patronage and this changing idea through the ages of the artist as an individual. You don't have as much of an issue with forgeries of like a singular artist before this idea that there's genius associated with creating art.
Yeah, and I think that also, because that culture shift wherein we do have this obsession with that artist's specific genius, that also correlates to the increasing value of an authentic Da Vinci or an authentic Dürer or an authentic Rembrandt, because of course I only want the best of the best. If I'm going to buy a piece of art, I want it to be real. Why would I want it to be fake? I mean, nobody necessarily wants that, but that's something where my article gets into.
Yes.
Yeah. So my article is called "The Beyond the Relic Cult of Art"
by Alexander Nagel.
Yes. And he is an art historian who's working at the Institute of Fine Art at NYU. And I love the opening of his article because he basically says, "I'm nostalgic for a time before the modern concept of art forgery had gelled, when it was possible to imagine many ways for artworks to exist out of their time." So I think he really is criticizing our obsession with authenticity. What do you think about that?
I loved your article because it's definitely dealing... My article was very much like laying out the facts. This is forgery. This is a lot of like maybe some of the legal definitions as well. But then yours gets into what I always want to be included in these discussions, which is more areas of gray, and how I actually highlighted something here on the first page as well about how with forgery, like there's a potential for something to be learned. It's not strictly, it doesn't have to be this negative thing, but rather like from the perspective of a forger, I would want to learn what it took to produce the works and how like the forger's ability to do that changed over time. What can you learn about an artist's trajectory from actually investigating that? Yeah.
And also, why does an artwork have to be so tied to its original context and its original, I guess, its authentic kind of sense of being, you know? I think it's super fascinating how the most commonly like reproduced artworks are, you know, let's I mean, we can say like the sunflowers from Van Gogh, or we can talk about, well, I think Dürer's prints as well. Thank you. I'm like, woo. You're excited. Back in the day, everybody wanted a print by Dürer, which is super cool. And like, it just, if anything, is a testament also to the artist's popularity.
Well, your article uses multiple examples from Michaelangelo, and actually, like, right here at the beginning of the article, I was like, I should talk about this Michelangelo story, because he was living at a time when, like you said in the first sentence, the concept of art forgery hadn't solidified yet, and so during the Renaissance, they were still... it was more fluid in that they were reproducing old works. You know, that's how anyone learned how to be an artist at the time, was to replicate something from a master. Yeah. Michelangelo took it a step further. There are multiple examples from here, but the story that came to mind for me was that he has a sculpture of Dionysus that he created after a master in the style of an ancient sculpture. And when he first brought it to the person who was looking at it, they were like, well, you know, you did a good job, but it's not an original. It's not actually old. So like, it's nice, but thanks. He took it back and then he broke it. Yeah. And he put it back together. And he added this concept of a little bit of story in order to make it feel older.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was able to trick people into thinking that it was actually
brilliant
of the age.
Yeah. And I think that's being of the age. Like, why doesn't artwork have to be of that age? Why do we appreciate kind of that weathering, the passage of time in an artwork, if we can also transport it to the current moment? And I think that's kind of what the author is critical of, is our obsession with this rare old thing that stood the test of time, the story, when we can also just enjoy the subject matter, and we can just enjoy the artwork, right? But I will say there is also a case to be made for time and place, and kind of bringing an artwork back to its original context. I think, for example, if you think about the Elgin marbles at the British Museum that Greece desperately wants repatriated back to where they belong. I mean, for me, that's also a very important context. So, can we, or would a solution be to replicate the Elgin marbles and just have the originals returned? Yeah. And the fakes.
Or have fakes in Greece, which they don't want to do, which I completely understand. Right. Yeah,
it's fascinating.
There are a lot of examples in Florence specifically that I can think of where, because it's kind of like an open air museum, the whole city is just a little bubble of Renaissance. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of artworks that are out on the street that are meant to be displayed out on the street, and like the bulk of those are replicas at this point. They're not original, and there's no signage really. So tourists will go through like, wow, this is amazing. Like the front of the Duomo is a lot of replica statues, and if you want to see the originals, you have to go to the Duomo Museum. But most people won't do that, so they'll just enjoy it in its intended context. And I do like that, because I don't think that most tourists are interested in engaging in the conversation of, is this the same experience now that I don't know, now that I do know that it's not original?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of, when people get a perfect replica of an expensive watch. Am I going to wear a 50,000 euro watch out to the club? No. I'm going to get the replica. Art is meant to be enjoyed. Art is meant to be observed. It's meant to be, I guess, not used, but it's meant to live with you. Yeah. And I think this is a really good solution, because it allows people to engage with artwork as it was, displayed back in the day, while still protecting maybe the original. But I would maybe even go as far as to say, why wouldn't you put the original out? I mean, if it was out of reach, but that's the whole problem with how the art market works. It's become so valuable and so rare, and everybody wants, and people know that it's valuable, that you can't risk that.
I'm looking at your article again, and I have a note here that I want to talk about. Kind of, last episode we talked about the idea of the artist being a genius, but something that also happened around the Renaissance, when this concept of forgery starts becoming more prevalent, is we really start establishing a Western canon of art as well. The first art historian was Giorgio Vasari, who wrote kind of the first textbook on artists of antiquity and present day. I mean, most of it was just him storytelling and gossiping about his friends.
I love it.
But that was 1550. So
it's not that long ago.
No. And I think in some ways we're still grappling with how to write art history as it's happening. Yeah. It's something that you can really only do successfully in hindsight. And even then, like you were saying, with the art market, and specifically like old masters, that business getting smaller and smaller, things can still emerge that are going to change the way that we view the past. And recontextualize it.
I love that. That's so true. And I also think it's so fascinating, because I think with the invention of the Western canon, we also see this increasing attention and importance to a specific artwork that changed or shifted something in the development of art. So you can think about it's Picasso's Les Mademoiselles d'Avignon, I think.
Mademoiselle d'Avignon, yeah.
And the MoMA, which we consider the beginning of Cubism. But I also think it's fascinating to me because, okay, so we all can like look at that artwork and say it's one of a kind. It changed the game. It's so important for history. It has to be protected. But then you also have to think of Picasso as a working artist. Imagine if he did invent, or did he invent it? Well, let's say he co-created a style of art, and he sees it's very successful. So then, of course, if I'm an artist, I'm making many iterations of that. I'm going to market the shit out of it. I'm going to get my bag. And do I really care if the one is distinctly unique from the other? No, I'm just going to continue to produce because I have to work. I have to eat. Yeah. So that's what Michaelangelo did as well. I mean, he was a businessman as well. But same with Rembrandt, all of them.
All of them are businessmen. All of them are making money. But you bring up a good point, like contrasting Michelangelo with Picasso. I'm thinking like artists of the past versus 20th century, more contemporary artists. Because with Michelangelo, we have it like pretty well known what artworks he made. Yeah. So there are only a few on the list that could possibly be lost artworks. Whereas with like just the proliferation of art for modern art, the amount of artworks that modern artists were pumping out, there's more of a space for a forger to create something that looks similar to that. Absolutely. And then build a story around it that this is the real painting. Yeah. Your author gets into that at the like bottom of page 2 because they're talking about specifically the abstract expressionists having to deal with that because they made a lot of artwork. And it reminded me of a great documentary I saw. I don't remember the name about it, but it talked about a 60s artist named Poons. Poons.
Haven't heard of him.
He made these pieces that were like very 60s. It was all in the same style. But whereas other artists, the way that your author says it is artists would shift direction in order to reclaim authenticity and originality. But that was to court a different kind of inauthenticity. That by changing your art up because it's getting a little boring now, we need you to spice it up, that's just as inauthentic.
Fair. That's a really good... I didn't catch that in the article. That's true.
Whereas Poons, he, in that situation, he kept with his style. Yeah. He kept making the same things. And so he kind of fell into obscurity because of that. And then the documentary is interesting for art business because basically what happened is he continued as a very, very poor artist for many decades. And then the art market, in a desire similar to like picking stocks, was like, well, there's this unknown guy from the 60s who's still active. Let's sell his stuff and build the story around it so that it sells for a lot more money.
Wow. Yeah. Makes sense. That's a really good example of that. I think, yeah. Well, for me, I also, it just kind of touches so many different subjects because I also think about NFTs and how you get your certificate there. I mean, there's still, like, no matter how reproducible any image becomes or anything that any artist creates becomes, people still want to own it. There's also this obsession with, like, ownership and I mean, links back to, like, private property and how, like, having something that nobody else has will just increase its value. And the market will continue to come up with ideas and ways to satisfy that demand. This is an example of that, the Poons. It's not necessarily that people were maybe, like, craving another abstract expressionist, but maybe... okay, all the Rothkos are nearly sold out or they're all in private collections or museums.
We need more demand.
we need another one.
Or there is demand.
There is demand. Yeah. So we'll continue. It's like we'll create the desire for demand, and we'll also supply it.
Feed the beast.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, yeah. And I think as long as that system is in place, and I don't even know if I could imagine anything else, I think forgery will continue to proliferate.
It will exist. Your article does a great job of not only sticking to like Western art as well.
Yeah.
Expands. Actually, there was one offhanded comment that they had about like, in China, the discourse of art forgery begins very early, but in Europe, it's rare to hear about forgeries of art before 1500. Mm-hmm. They didn't go on to say anything about that history in China, but I'm curious now.
Yeah, me too.
And they also talk about how there is a huge market in China right now where they have like forgery factories, full warehouses full of people that are just replicating works.
Yeah.
I don't believe that they sell them as originals. They sell them as copies.
Yeah.
But you can imagine that in that there's definitely going to be the generation of skill to be able to make a good forgery that then will get taken advantage of by somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. Like, where do you sit on all of this? If you want to kind of share your personal opinion, like, is that a bad thing that there are factories out there and there's people who are, working to create like perfect replicas because they also have the technical knowledge and, okay, let's use a specific pigment that would have been found in, like
replicating it on a scientific level is that's definitely getting into the realm of you're making a forgery now if you're trying to trick somebody, not just like with the eye, but through technical analyses as well. Yeah. I don't know if I have a problem with it. Part of the purist in me wants to be mad about it, but the practical side is like, it's always happened. It's not a new thing. It goes alongside having valuable art is somebody who's going to try to take the shortcut. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well.
There's a quote there's also an article that we can also link from the New Yorker that's about a Dutch master forger who's called Han van Meegeren, and he is very well known in the Netherlands.
He's very famous.
I think probably in general.
Yeah. Tell the story. Go ahead.
So this man, he's a legend. He was a master forger of Vermeer's. And if you know Vermeer, you know that his oeuvre is very, very small.
Yeah.
It's
like 36 paintings.
Yeah. So people were desperate for, any additional content. They were like, give us more. And Han was like, you know what? I will. I will. Especially the Nazi party, who was also desperate for
because it was
art.
At the same time. Yeah.
Exactly. Is the 40s. This is the 40s. The Nazis were, as we know, they were just kind of seizing collections throughout Europe, and they wanted to put it into the kind of grand vision of this grand museum that they had in plan. Van Meegeren was able to actually sell, I guess he did sell some of his counterfeits to the Nazi party. And, he kind of swindled them. It was after World War II, after the Nazi party fell, he was actually put on trial for this. But he said, guys, I did good things. I basically sold fakes or counterfeits they were forgeries because they tried to be exact. He really was very technical about it as well. There were even I think there were a few hanging in the Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam. Yeah.
Everyone believed that they were Vermeer's, which, by the way, if you're familiar with Vermeer at all, if you know what his paintings look like, and then you see one of these paintings, it does not look like a Vermeer.
That's what I thought. I was like, wait, when I was, getting back into this topic, I was like, wow. Okay. So
they look bad.
They look bad. I guess people had other things to think about, though.
No, but that's what it is. This gets into like the storytelling.
Yeah.
Like forgery is a confidence scheme, and it's about not only like the desire of the forger to make something to replicate an artist and like achieve that type of mastery. Like a lot of forgers imagine themselves to be these unacknowledged master
it's like
painters.
I could have been the original.
But it's also on the part of the public or the buyer. It's a willingness to believe the story.
Yeah.
Because there are so few Vermeers, it's like, I want to be one of the people who owns a new Vermeer.
Yeah,
That's crazy. And so they just sort of let it get away from them.
Yeah, and the quote at the end of the article, which I love, which is so true, reads, "Art forgery is among the least despised of crimes, except by its victims." Which is true.
Yes.
I don't think any of us, like, you're never going to become completely upset about this subject until you've been duped.
Yeah.
And until you've spent, you know, a big chunk of money on something and it comes out that it's a fake.
And even if you, like, are shown evidence that it is a fake, there was a guy in my article who basically was like, as long as I'm alive, it's real, it's authentic. Like, he was unwilling to acknowledge that it was a fake.
I remember that. I mean, you have some of these connoisseurs who are art historians or curators at museums who will stand by their statement. They're like, no, yeah, I think it is real.
It's pride.
Because, yeah, it's their pride. And that's a whole chapter, I guess, in that book that they get into it. But it's fascinating. I mean, I guess I understand. You don't want to be the one that, you know, kind of has the differing opinion and you made the wrong call, but
yeah, it's hard to be the person that stands out in a crowd.
People will really, I wonder how many, I guess, counterfeits actually exist
that we don't know about. I'd be very confident betting that there are a lot of fakes that are in private collections.
Yeah, I agree.
Because then there's less a chance of it getting, you know, technical testing on it. Also, you only have to convince the person who's the buyer.
Yeah.
The buyer, even if they think it might be a forgery, would be scared to lose out on their invested value. So they're not going to ask anybody to authenticate it.
Nope. And they're probably not going to bring it to market because what if it actually was counterfeit all along? What if it is a forgery? Or, I mean, sometimes I think at the pace at which people want to collect, there's also a lot of course, whitewashing in the art market. People have cash they need to offload and they need to just put it into an artwork.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, I'm just going to buy and I don't have time to check the provenance or I don't, you know, I'm not going to do my own research.
That's what I pay people for.
Yeah. Somebody else is going to do that for me. Well, you know, you might have, you know, a bad apple in the mix. Can happen.
Oh, yeah. We were talking about like owners of artwork being unwilling to say that it is a forgery. Even connoisseurs, so like the people who are familiar with the artist and are the people who do the authentication when it comes to that. As an example here, H.P. Bremer, an art expert who once said of an Odilon Redon drawing that even if Redon himself declared that the drawing was one of his best, Bremer would still know that it was a forgery because declaring authenticity was Bremer's job, not the artist's.
Ooh.
That's fucking crazy.
It's like, you made that.
That's a lot. Especially coming from my perspective as a conservator where, like, if we have an actual primary source from the artists themselves, like, that's unimpeachable. Well, to some extent. I mean, there is, like, the argument that if an artist later in life looks at something that they did in the past and they're like, I actually hate that, we should destroy it. Like, no, you don't get to decide that.
Yeah.
But to have this ego, there's always so much ego in art. Not even just from the artist, but also from the authenticators.
Everybody around it.
Yeah.
Because everybody has an opinion.
How do you feel about everyone having an opinion? My article doesn't seem to like that at all.
I guess my thing is like, it's not really, I don't care if, okay, let me just try to simplify this. I think the job of a museum or a public institution is to safeguard cultural heritage. And I think it doesn't matter if you think it's ugly or if the artist thought it was ugly, or if it's, I don't know, maybe it doesn't even matter if it's a forgery per se. It's part of the story of also like our shared story. It's part of something bigger than itself. It's taken on a new life. Of course, it becomes an issue when there's money involved. Like, I mean, this is also what the article gets back to. It's an issue when somebody's paid X amount for it and it turns out to not be the thing they paid for. Yeah. And I think that's when people really, you know, get into a big brouhaha.
And that's why the public also really likes forgers, right? Because they're taking the mick out of the rich people. It's very much like a Robin Hood sort of story. Yeah. And a lot of forgers actually go on to have careers. If they get caught and they go to prison, they go on to have careers as artists or doing something, and they get attention from the public because it's fun. Yeah. It's honestly fun. Forgery
I love Catch Me If You Can. That's a different form of forgery.
So Catch Me If You Can, the movie I think of is Audrey Hepburn, How to Steal a Million.
I haven't seen that.
We have to watch it.
Okay.
It's so good. Yeah. Oh, you asked earlier about like my opinion on forgery, and actually I remember that part of my training as a conservator is or for me specifically with my program, was to replicate artwork. So that wasn't just limited to the technique of the artist in terms of painting it. We also remade original pigments, followed the recipes from the same time period, did it very much in the same way. And exactly like your article pontificates that forgers might have some information or insight into the artist that they're replicating. By doing that replica work, the idea is that we learn how a painting gets built up, that you get into the mind of the artist, that you have like a deeper understanding because you've physically done it yourself. And I think that there is a place for that type of work that doesn't have to be forgery. It is educational. Yeah. And I really love that your author like highlighted that, because the last thing I want to say is that they talk about this artist Giulio Romano, who was a student of Raphael. And there was a forgery at the time that was a forgery of a Raphael that he had hanging in his own house that he didn't know was a forgery. Right. And when it was finally proven to him by Raphael, like, hey, I didn't do this. Yeah. He said, I don't esteem it less than if it were by the hand of Raphael. In fact, I value it higher because it is a thing beyond nature that an excellent man could imitate so well the style of another and make it so similar.
Exactly. Beautiful. I mean, at the end of the day, like it is a testament to technique and to inspiration and wanting. I mean, you know, they say imitation is the greatest form or the highest form of flattery, of course. And I think I love that. It's very true. I just wonder, like, will the academic community, will the museum community, and the experts, will they kind of embrace that idea, or just or imagine like. It would be so fun to do kind of research on, okay, who did make this and what inspired this forgery? What does it say about human nature that we can kind of
like? I would love to see an exhibit at a museum that's all forgeries. That's like so getting cool. into this.
Yeah, that would be great.
But rather than that, like. Again, your article, I really liked your article.
I know,
it's only 2 pages.
I'm like, I think you got more in depth than I did.
It's only 2 pages long. So, like, if you read nothing else from all the articles that we have for the last 4 episodes, read this one.
Read this one.
Because, wait, what was I about to say? Just view it all in its entirety. Like, take... art doesn't get created in a vacuum and then have a price tag stapled onto it. Like, you can... get more out of these forgeries than maybe we've historically thought.
Yeah. I think that's a really poignant way to conclude. I mean, and it's true. There's always, instead of criticizing something because it's, oh, how dare, you've swindled someone or it's a hoax. There's something beyond the veil. And there's indeed this kind of, what does it say about artwork when it can kind of pop up in different places and different people can master a certain technique and there's a desire to. And I don't know if I believe very much in the idea that only one person can have a brilliant idea and nobody else gets to. You have so many cases also in the music industry where certain melodies are kind of pop up and thought of, and you get into copyright cases and like these, intellectual property cases. But sometimes it really is the thing where there are two people on opposite sides of the world and they have the same idea or the same talent or the same technique. And yeah, you can argue about who thought of it first or who inspired whom,
and people will.
But I think indeed, like what the article gets at is let's embrace it a bit.
Yes.
Let's see that as something really inspiring. It sounds very cheesy, but I think that's like...
I love that we've turned an episode on forgery into something that's like a love letter.
It's actually really good.